No, thanks, Rahul. I think, in fact, the thrust on the social sector, or you could call it social infrastructure, has been phenomenal in this budget. So it's really balanced. It's a budget for all. So in addition to the huge increase in capital expenditure of 10 lakhs next year, this continued 50-year interest-free loan to state governments for another year, in addition to all that, which is really going to drive medium-term growth, look at the emphasis on the social sector. I can immediately think of the PVTG mission, the Pradhan Mantri particularly vulnerable tribal group. There are about 28 to 30 lakh of tribals who are at the bottom of the ladder, and 15,000 crores has been allocated for giving them basic services in just 3 years. I think that's a huge step in terms of inclusion. But so many of the other programs, whether it's for artisans, whether it's for farmers or youth, I think that the focus of the government on the social sector has continued and even been accelerated.
Okay, let's go scheme by scheme. Manrega allocation down about 13,000 crore rupees. Ayushman Bharat flat with an increase of just 743 crore rupees, so it's virtually the same as last year. The education mission allocation down about 600 crore rupees. The health mission allocation down 375 crore rupees. Swachh Bharat allocation up but just by 2,700 crore rupees. PM Kisan allocation down by 8,000 crore rupees. Now that's the data. The data speaks for itself. The money moves, you can say what you are, but the allocation on a sector by sector basis seems to suggest that there has been a reduction in many of the key social sector schemes.
You can get into the numbers game. Let's try and understand the thrust this budget is given for women. Look at the focus on the self-help groups for women. There are about 80 lakhs of them. That's a huge, thrust area. You look at farmers, whether it's horticulture, whether it's fishermen, look at the artisans. So I think that there's no question of any slackening of the focus on the social sector. Education, health, skilling, it's all very much on the agenda. I mean, this is a budget which will continue the growth with inclusion thrust of the government. And the main thing is implementation on the ground. As you know, Rahul, this is a government which has over the last 8 years actually delivered results on the ground at scale. I don't think that's ever happened before. And in fact, there's one interesting feature of the finance minister's speech which you may not have noticed. She spoke about the need to move from input-based to outcome-based. And results-based financing will be piloted next year, which is looking at how do you actually achieve outcomes on the ground and have them independently verified. So Niti's been working a lot on that. In addition, the state support mission is taking all the development down and in partnership with the states right down to the block level. So the aspirational block program, which Niti has been working with states on, is taking development all the way down. So I think there's no question of development in the social sector or
Dr.
right
Lahiri,
down to the grassroots.
Let me get your perspective on this. The numbers suggest that in some of the key social sector schemes, the allocations have actually come down. Is that a robust enough defense, or is just the facts? The numbers speak for themselves, they tell their own story.
See, in social sector, Rahul, I would like to distinguish between two parts. One is health and education. The other is welfare payments. Now, health and education, I think, have not been neglected. But as is natural, we are coming out of a cycle down, the pandemic is over. So insofar as their welfare payments are concerned, I wouldn't be that much worried if those expenditure remain flat or even goes down slightly, particularly because we also know the capacity of the government to spend properly. I mean, you can throw money.
But how much can you
spend?
Param, one area where you've been personally very closely involved is the Jal Jeevan mission. Now, the whole idea that there should be tap water coming into every home before the next election, that scheme has actually seen allocation go up by 10,000 crore rupees from 60,000 crores to 70,000. Give our viewers an update on how far we've reached, how much progress we've made, how much ground is there to cover before water flows out of every home in India.
Yeah, Rahul. So Har Ghar Jal under the Jal Jeevan mission is very much on track. This is another one of the Prime Minister's sort of big bang programs which are basic services at scale, very much like the Swachh Bharat mission. 11 crore, the technical term is functional household tap connections have been set up. They're about 60% of the way, all the way up to the 18 or 19 crore households to be targeted. So it's going on in full swing. It's very much on track. And this is, Rahul, as you know, this is India delivering on the SDGs well before the targeted time of 2030. It happened in sanitation, it's happening in drinking water, it's happening across other sectors. So this is pretty much a government which walks the talk and delivers at scale on schedule.
Thank you, Paramaya, for joining us. Appreciate your thoughts. Wish you all the best for what you're doing. I want to introduce now Aswini Vaishnav, Minister for many things, including railways, communications, electronics, information technology. So we'll have some questions cutting across different portfolios that he runs. And also with us is Mr. P. Chidambaram, former finance minister. So we'll go across to Minister Vaishnav first, and then we'll get an opposition counter from the former finance minister. I want to start, Minister Vaishnav, with railways, where the allocation has gone up from 1.4 lakh crore rupees to 2.4 lakh crore rupees. Till about 2014, the allocation typically used to be 45,000 odd crore rupees capital expenditure on railways. With the additional 1 lakh crore rupees that you're getting, give our viewers a quick sense of where you intend to spend the money and how you're trying to ensure that this has the maximum multiplier on the India growth story.
Absolutely, Rahul. And see, if you go 10 years back, railways was adding just about 4 kilometers a day new tracks. Now that's a pitifully small amount for a large network like Indian Railways, for a large population that has to be served, and for a very large cargo, very large logistics sector that has to be served. Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji has put in many reforms in railways over the last 8 years. Every year he has increased the allocation for capital investment in railways, and the result is this year, against the 4 kilometers per day, we are doing 12 kilometers per day new railway tracks, doubling and gauge conversion. That's a huge number by any standards, and going at this pace, next year we should be doing about 16 kilometers a day. The multiplier effect of infrastructure investment in railways is higher than the average for the country, higher than the average for the economy. Average is around 3.4 or 3.5, whereas in railways this exceeds 4.3, 4.4 as per many economists. I am not an economist, I cannot vouch for it. That's a large number, and that straight away feeds into employment generation in terms of GDP growth. See, the fundamental point that I would like to place here is railways has been historically a technology importer, product importer. Over the last 8 years under the Make in India program, multiple initiatives like Vande Bharat, like Kavach, these have made us a very important player in the world railway market, and in the way manufacturing is growing. In coming 3 years, we should be seeing major exports out of India in the railway sector.
Okay, one of the things that you're leading and the Prime Minister and the government is very passionate about is turning India into a semiconductor hub. I also want to welcome Minister Piyush Goyal, who's joining us on this broadcast. Minister Goyal, just give me a moment. I want to ask a couple of more questions to Aswini Vaishnav ji, and I'm coming back to you in just a moment. Okay, so now give our viewers a sense of how long will it be before some of these fabs actually come up in India. One of the things we heard from our commentators was that there is a global global glut in capacity for semiconductors. There's already excess capacity, and by the time a lot of these semiconductors will come up, it'll take a few years. The technology will be old. So how do you respond to some of these concerns? And you would have also seen that interview we did with Raghuram Rajan at Davos, which went viral, where he's basically saying that this is a scheme which is essentially giving some kind of a subsidy to corporates. It's not money well used. India could be using the money better. Try and explain how soon will we see some of these semiconductor fabs up and running, and why you believe this is a very important investment for India to be making.
Rahul, your question has multiple questions. I'll take maybe 2.5, 3 minutes to explain the entire scenario. See, there are three perspectives to it. First perspective is that India has now emerged as a major electronics manufacturing country with close to $87 billion worth electronics manufacturing in the country, which was negligible 10 years back. With this, the demand for semiconductors within the country itself has grown. Item one. Item two, we have a very large talent pool, close to 52,000 engineers in semiconductor design. That's a huge number that automatically creates a very good impetus for having semiconductor manufacturing also coming to the country. Third, the semiconductor market globally has seen some very interesting developments. Yes, semiconductor market is known for its vicious ups and downs, very, very vicious cycles. But the industry which grew to 600 odd billion in 55, 60 years is going to grow to $1 trillion in coming 6 years, in 7 years. Imagine it's like 60 years versus 7 years. So that kind of growth is happening in the industry. So the temporary downturn in demand for certain categories cannot be seen as a long-term or even a mid-term significant reduction in the demand. There is very important development, which is basically the mature nodes, which were earlier considered as not significant at all, have come back with huge demand. Almost 50% of the demand is today for 28 nanometer plus, which all goes into telecom equipment, which goes into power electronics, which goes into electric vehicles, which goes into multiple appliances that we see today. So that as the overall picture, we are very well placed to develop a semiconductor manufacturing industry in the country, and we are getting very good response. Our government's sincerity, our government's focus, our government's sense of purpose in developing this industry. This is a strategic industry. Anybody, and I have a lot of respect for all the great economists' name whom you are taking, but anybody who looks at a long-term story, growth story for a country should be investing in this industry. We should be seeing some good announcements very soon, and good progress has been made. I wouldn't be able to disclose anything at this point of time though.
We're told there's a big announcement coming sometime soon, and we will track that, and I look forward to seeing you on the 6th of February at the India Today, Business Today Budget Roundtable. I want to go across to Mr. Piyush Goyal now. Thank you, Aswini ji, for joining us. There's so much to talk about in terms of what you're doing, so we'll build on this on the 6th when we see you, so it'll be great to have you there. Piyush, you have lots of questions, and I'll start with the question on private investment. One of the things that's being said by those in the opposition is that the government is having to do so much of the heavy lifting on public infrastructure expenditure because the other engines of the economy haven't kicked into shape the way the government would have wanted when corporate taxes were brought down. How do you respond to this suggestion that the government, despite all the nudges, private and public, including some of the nudges from you, that you have you been able to get the private investment cycle going in the way that you would like? And if not, what's holding it back, and how soon do you see it kick into shape the way you would like?
Rahul, these are the naysayers who can hold that view. I mean, for some people, I'm damned if I do and I'm damned if I don't. And that's the kind of approach that is reflected in this thinking. It is the government's job to provide adequate, sustainable, robust infrastructure on the back of which, of course, the economy gets the benefit of a multiplier impact. And as you are aware, infrastructure or capex investments give you almost a 3.5x multiplier benefit. But more importantly, across the world, you will observe that unless your goods and services are competitive, you cannot compete in international markets, and no country has become a developed nation without having adequate and strong domestic systems, both for logistics, for infrastructure, for adequate port infrastructure. And to my mind, Honorable Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharamanji has really hit the nail on the head by her actions over the last 4 years. Capex spending has grown from 3.5 lakh crores 4 years ago to 5.5, 7.5, and now 10 lakh crores. Effective Capex is 13.5 lakh crores. Because today, even when we spend in a scheme like Manrega, we don't just dig a hole and fill it up. That was the kind of thinking governments in the past had. We try to create some infrastructure out of that. Mention was made of 75 Amrit Sarovars in each district. Now this is a very visionary long-term thinking that we should have water reservoirs which will come to our rescue in the time of a calamity or a need. Similarly, the focus on tourism. We are all aware that tourism is the highest job generator per rupee invested. And private sector always invests when there is demand for goods and services. And infrastructure investment or capex creates that demand for goods and services. That demand then gives you consumption expenditure. Consumers then further fuel the demand for infrastructure, and that virtuous cycle propels the economy to higher levels of growth.
Let's spend a moment on exports. In the first 2 quarters of the last year, exports were doing smashingly well, and everybody said, okay, this is great news for India because merchandise exports are taking off in a big way. Then, because of all the global turmoil, in the third quarter, exports were flat. In the fourth quarter, it's being said that exports could actually be either flat or potentially even negative in terms of growth. What's your outlook for exports in the year going forward, given their importance to the India growth story and given all the global uncertainty? The fact that trade barriers are being created, there are trade tensions between China and the United States, everybody is trying to do a version of Atmanirbhar America, Atmanirbhar Europe, even if they don't say it like that. So where does that, how does that jeopardize or push back what you're trying to get done with export growth?
No, it doesn't push back anything we are doing. It only reinforces the urgency of all our actions. So this government has taken several actions to promote exports. For example, for the first time, our missions worldwide have got involved in our effort to expand trade. Trade, tourism and technology, for that matter, all three. For the first time with production-linked incentive schemes, we are trying to create capacities to global scale. For the first time ever, the bigger focus is on quality. And you might be aware we have almost doubled the quality control orders in the last 2.5 years. Going forward, we'll be expanding our focus on quality because we believe both consumers in India and internationally want to see high quality and competitively priced goods and services. And my own understanding is that quality never costs anything. Quality is the cheapest thing going. It actually helps you to save wastage and losses and reduce your cost. So we are doing a kind of holistic planning to prepare the nation to become a large player in the international markets. Last year, exports of goods and services combined were about $674 billion. This year, we'll see a double-digit growth. Again, when we look at goods and services combined, certainly services growing faster, merchandise will grow slower, but still grow. And despite all this international turmoil, despite inflation having reduced consumption demand, despite heavy stocking in many countries which is not getting consumed, India's exports continue to grow, albeit modestly in merchandise and on the fast lane in services. Overall, we'll do a double-digit growth this year also. For the next year, we are also working on, we have already concluded 2 free trade agreements. UAE and Australia, they will start giving us results. Australia has just come into force 1 month ago. We are looking at more free trade agreements with developed countries, the G7 countries, and going forward, as we improve our capacity to offer goods and services, as we improve our quality, become more competitive, and have greater trading arrangements so that we have duty-free access which some of our neighboring countries or countries like Vietnam, Bangladesh have through being an LDC or because of their free trade agreements, that competitive edge where they have an edge over us, we'll be able to nullify. And I do believe that going forward, our target for 2030 is $2 trillion of exports, 1 trillion of merchandise, 1 trillion of services.
Okay, I have one more question for Minister Goyal, but I also want to introduce Anish Shah, who heads the Mahindra Group as its Managing Director and Chief Executive. So Anish, welcome. I want to go back to Piyush Goyal about, you were saying that 2 trillion will come from exports. You also had the 30 trillion number, which a lot of people then said, "Kya bol rahe hain Piyush ji, 30 trillion abhi kahan pe hum log pahuche?" Given that the government didn't meet the 5 trillion target at the date. Now, of course, the pandemic happened and so many other things happened, which were a black swan kind of event, and that pushed you back. But it didn't happen at the timeline that you said. Is this a former investment person, a former chartered accountant, just trying to talk up the India story? Because ultimately, the credibility of what a government or a minister says depends on then the ability to get that target done. One thing is to talk up spirits. The other is to actually make it happen given that timeline. That's question number one. Question number two is on demand. The one question being asked is whether there is enough in the budget to actually spur demand. Your opponents will say that because there is unemployment, people don't have money, it's a K-shaped recovery. Therefore, there isn't as much consumption demand and the budget doesn't do adequate to spur that. So respond to both of those and then I go across to Anish.
I'll just make one housekeeping correction. You don't become a former chartered accountant. I'm a chartered accountant for the rest of my life, Rahul. So please don't take that away from me. But on a more serious note, first of all, my current exports need to grow at about 9% in merchandise and about 16% in services to achieve the 1 trillion of services and 1 trillion of merchandise exports by 2030. It's a matter of fact, statistical calculation. It's not something out of the top of my head. And it's been shared with all the export promotion councils, with all the large exporters, including Mr. Anish Shah's company, Mahindra Group, which is a large player in the world markets. And by and large, the feedback I get is that as we are delivering on the free trade agreements, as India's own competitive spirits, competitiveness is improving and our animal spirits are getting more and more activated. As India is becoming an easier place to do business, as our startups and technology and innovation is finding center stage in the world, as the world is looking to diversify to, let's say, friendshoring or looking for trusted partners, I think the global stars are actually aligning themselves to support us in our ambitious plans. So first of all, most doable export target, you need not worry. The 30 trillion is also on a business as usual scenario. And by the way, it's one of my calling cards when I go negotiating a free trade agreement. With 1.4 billion people aspiring for a better quality of life, with nuclear families and more women coming into the workforce, the demand for goods and services in India is going to present huge opportunity, both for Indian domestic production and wherever we are not competitive, even for other countries to support us. So I'm very confident, given our historical track record, our own economy over the last 30 years has grown 11.8 times in a situation where it was not easy to do business, where foreign investments were low, India's macroeconomic fundamentals were weak, inflation was in double digit. Despite all that, we are now 11.8 times what we were 30 years ago. So when I talk of a $35 trillion economy from a $3.5 trillion economy now, let's say 25 years down the road, it's absolutely and eminently doable. And let me tell you, it will happen. And I hope to live to see that happen, as I hope you do.
Oh, absolutely. It'll be fantastic if it does. It'll be even more fantastic if you can make it happen in the timelines that you've laid. That would be great for everyone who is a part of this India story.
100%.
Okay, thank you very much.
100% we will make it happen. And under the leadership of Prime Minister Modi, I assure you the people of India also believe it will happen.
Okay, we leave it over there. Minister Goyal, thank you very much for joining us. I want to tell our viewers that we have P. Chidambaram, the former finance minister, man who's actually made 9 budgets. So he knows a thing or two about making budgets. He'll be speaking to us in a moment from now. I want to get a word in from Anisha on the expectation now shifting towards India Inc. The government says we have done enough and more. Allocation on capital expenditure for public goods, public infrastructure increased once again in a very big way. The one thing that everyone in government and outside are waiting for is for the India Inc. investment cycle to kick off. You know, we've been hearing from a lot of commentators, top CEOs, pundits, there's a lot of discussion happening in boardrooms and everyone's wondering when will that when will the discussion actually lead to decisions and decisions ultimately result in investments?
So to start with, I would say this is an outstanding budget. It's disciplined, it is growth-oriented, sustainable, and inclusive. You mentioned the capital expenditure part, and that is a very important element in this budget, not just from a headline perspective of a 33% growth, but also because it's gone up from 1.67% of GDP to 3.3% in the last 4 years. And in the history of India, we've never seen 4 consecutive years of increase in this manner in capital expenditure. It has a multiplier of 3x. So there are various factors that are very positive. And to address specifically the question around, has the government done enough? I would say it has. We've seen a number of initiatives around PLI, around tax rationalization, making business easier. Even in the budget, there were a number of provisions in the print around making business easier to do. And it is up to the private sector. We are at this point in time doubling capacity in the auto business. We are halfway there, and we should get to the rest in the next 12 months or so. We are adding 60% capacity in our tractor business. So we are at a point where industry has to step up, has to do a lot more, and we're in a position to do that.
No, but Dr. Lahiri, if you look at the overall picture, now some of the instances of investment that Anisha cites are individual to his group and his companies. But as a whole, India Inc. hasn't invested as much as the government would have expected when corporate taxes were brought down. Capacity utilization stays in the mid-70s. Is that the way it will likely be through the year, or do you see that change at some point in time in the year and a multi-year investment cycle kick off?
I do not have the numbers right away, but if you look at investment as a proportion of GDP, it has been going up in the last 3 years, slightly. I wish it was more. When China invests something like 34-35% of GDP, even in a bad year, we can't even make up 30%. So we do not invest enough. But so there is a mild increase in the investment ratio, but you're right, it hasn't been as much as we would have liked it to be.
Okay, Mr. Shah, on the question of consumption demand and the absence of consumption demand, you have so many consumer-facing companies both in the urban and in the rural sector. This whole argument about whether we are seeing a V-shaped recovery or it's V only for the rich, and actually it's a K-shaped recovery, and that whether enough is being done to spur demand in rural areas. Your outlook on that?
So we are seeing strong demand across all our businesses today. We are also seeing signs of a K-shaped recovery. So it is important to ensure that it is inclusive growth. And that is something, again, I think this budget has done well to push for that inclusive growth, to push for creating demand for as the Prime Finance Minister said, the hardworking middle class. And I think that's an important step that will help the next year as we go forward.
Okay, so we leave it over there. Thank you very much, Anisha, Chief Executive Officer at Mahindra Group, for joining us on this broadcast. I want to go across now to Mr. P. Chidambaram. And a point of trivia, Mr. Chidambaram holds the record for being the man who's delivered the second most number of budgets. So Morarji Desai delivered 10 budgets, Mr. Chidambaram delivered 9. So he understands every comma and full stop of the budget maths. And interestingly, he's been your boss, Dr. Lahiri, in the past?
Direct boss.
So boss aa gaya, direct boss. The boss aa gaya show pe. Okay, let's go across now to Mr. Chidambaram. Mr. Chidambaram, welcome. Now, the government says we, in a tough macroeconomic situation, with all the kind of global headwinds that we are facing, have done the best that we could by massively increasing allocation for public spending and infrastructure, which is where the highest multiplier is, the rub-off effect is most for other sectors of the economy, and yet we haven't been fiscally reckless despite the fact that we are heading into an election cycle. Unlike Chidambaram, unlike Pranab Mukherjee of the UPA era, who did all kinds of things in the hopes that spending money would win them votes, this government says we are spending wisely on the infrastructure that matters most to the new India that the government is trying to build without being reckless like you were. How do you respond to that? What's your main critique of the budget? Mr. Chidambaram, welcome.
I hope the finance minister will actually spend the amount. For the current year, she allotted for capital expenditure 7,50,246 crore. But by the end of the year, the government will spend only 7,28,274 crore. So what she has allotted, 10 lakh odd crore, I hope she will spend it next year. At the end of the year, if you allot 10 lakh crore and spend only 8 or 9 lakh crore, this allotment is not expenditure. So whatever you allot for capital expenditure, I welcome it, but make sure you spend what you allot.
So you've been in the hot seat in North Block yourself. You realize better than anyone else the challenges when it comes to getting instruments of government to actually consume the money that is available for building this infrastructure. If they said they'll spend 7.5 lakh crore, spending 7,28,000 crore isn't that much off the target. But I'm trying to understand whether you'd at least accept that they're spending wherever each rupee of the government can do the most. It's not a dole or a freebie that's being handed out. You're laying the building blocks for a new India in the hope that this will spur consumption, this will spur investment, get the private sector active as well. So the government at least is pushing in the right direction. Do you accept that?
Listen, what you say, what I know, surely the finance minister also knows. It is not the allocation which matters. What is the actual expenditure which matters? From 7,50,000 crore, you have jumped it to a little over 10 lakh crore. That's an increase of over 34%. If you have bumped it up in the allocation, you assure us that you will spend, say, 98% of that or 97% of that. I am not sure that the finance minister can say, my business is only to allocate. The execution is not my business. Both are her business. Both are the finance minister's business. If you allocate money, make sure it is spent.
Is that a fair critique, Dr. Lahiri?
No, unspent balances are there at times. But
They've always been.
There always is, and there is the question sometimes that it's a very difficult question to answer, that if it's a leaking pipe, then do you pump more water into it? But when you're allocating money, you actually don't know what the leakages are. So capacity to spend is a major question, but it's very difficult to anticipate.
Mr. Chidambaram, the economic survey says India is likely to grow at 6.5% next year on the back of 7% growth for this year. The IMF says that India will be the fastest growing economy in the world. Relative to what's happening in the rest of the world, Europe flirting with recession, on the verge of recession, America a meltdown which may not lead to a recession but is a definite and clear slowdown. In the context of these choppy economic waters globally, would you accept that the government's done a reasonably good job of steering the economic wheel? They didn't ram us into uncertainty and into an iceberg, and they've kind of glided the country through at a time of once in 100 years economic uncertainty caused by the pandemic.
No, I would not say that. Let's start with current year. In the current year, the first quarter recorded a growth rate of 13.5%. In the second quarter, it is 6.3%. Now, if the overall annual growth will be only 7%, it is a simple arithmetic that quarter 3 and quarter 4 will record only 4.2 or 4%. So if you now arrange the quarterly growth in one line, it will mean 13.5% in the first quarter, down to 6.3% in the second quarter, further down to 4.2% in the third quarter, and the fourth quarter will be 4%. Is that a virtue? Is that something that we should applaud? I want an ascending quarterly growth rate. What we are getting is a descending quarterly growth rate. I'm not saying this has to be repeated next year. If the government is ensuring that it will grow, the economy will grow next year at 6.1 or 6.8, that's what the chief economic advisors say, the range is 6.1 to 6.8, I'll be happy, but not ecstatic. And I'll tell you why I will not be ecstatic. Why are you comparing our growth rate with the growth rate of China, which has a GDP 5 times more than India's, or America, which is perhaps 10, 12 times more than India? If you grow at 6% and China grows even at 2%, please remember, China will add wealth in 1 year more than the wealth that you will add. Again, that is simple arithmetic. And America, even if it grows at 2% or 2.5%, will add several times more domestic product to its economy than India will have. And why is the government so happy about the ranking? It is the fastest growing major economy in the world. I thought this government abhorred ranking. Then compare it with the other ranks: Global Hunger Index, infant mortality rate, freedom of index ranking. When all those rankings come, you dismiss it. But this one ranking, that you are the largest growing economy, yes, I'm happy. But the largest growing economy must be seen in relative terms, the overall size of the economy and the per capita income. If you factor all those aspects, the fact that we are a small economy growing at a faster rate does not make me ecstatic. It makes me happy, but not ecstatic.
One of the questions being asked is whether the budget has done enough to spur consumption demand. When we speak to corporates, they say the investment cycle hasn't kick-started because there isn't enough demand, and therefore if there isn't enough demand, does it even make sense to set up new capital expenditure in the private sector? Has enough been done to help ensure that a new investment cycle is kick-started in real earnest or is pushed into high gear?
You are conflating two separate issues. Consumption and the new tax regime are not to be mixed up. We'll come to the new tax regime. I'm a critic of the new tax regime, and many critics are there. We'll come to that later. Now, consumption is down because of unemployment, because of inflation. People are desperate for jobs. Rural unemployment is over 8%. Overall, all India unemployment is 8%. And now people are being laid off. All the major tech companies are laying off people, which means in the middle class, upper middle class also, we will have unemployment. On the other hand, there is inflation. These are the two reasons why consumption is low. If consumption is low, why would people invest? Unless their existing capacities fully utilized and they're able to satisfy the consumption demand, then they will make additional investment. So I think these are interrelated. Unless consumption improves, I doubt whether private investment will take place. In fact, I asked the finance minister in the last winter session, you went to the CII and FICCI and scolded them for not investing. Did you try to find out why they are not investing? She had no answer. You must examine why they are not investing. See, private investment is down. Private consumption is down, or at best stagnant. And exports are down. 3 of the 4 engines are down. The only engine which seems to be running is public investment, capital expenditure. I welcome that. But if 3 engines are sputtering, then the government should find out why are these 3 engines not running at full steam.
Okay.
The new tax regime is a separate issue. If you ask a separate question, I'll answer. But don't mix that up with consumption.
Okay, no, so I do have a question on the new tax regime, but let me just pose it in a different way. If I were to come to you and seek your advice, on behalf of all our viewers, Mr. Chidambaram, on the back of all your experience and expertise, you tell us in which income categories, according to you, does it make sense to switch over to the new tax regime? For who do you think it doesn't make sense to switch over to the new tax regime? You give us advice on what you think is the best thing to do.
See, I have got Excel sheets now, and I've asked a couple of chartered accountants to look at those Excel sheets and confirm to me whether it's beneficial or not. See, there is the economics of it, and there is the larger social security aspect. Let's deal with them separately. It's possible that the new tax regime will allow you to pay less tax in some slabs. And I'll tell you why. Not all exemptions are availed of by every taxpayer. Some taxpayer may avail of 6 exemptions, some may avail of 3 exemptions. It will all depend upon the taxpayer. And it will impact different income slabs differently. That Excel sheet will easily demonstrates that. So it's possible that in some income slabs, for taxpayers availing of a few exemptions, it will be beneficial. The new tax regime will be beneficial. But for the others, the old tax regime will be beneficial. The point is, you can't make a general statement that the new tax regime is beneficial to all taxpayers. If that was so, why in the last 2 to 3 years, why have all taxpayers not switched over to the new tax regime? The proof of the pudding is the eating. Chartered accountants, taxpayers have not rushed into the new tax regime because obviously it is not more beneficial than the old tax regime. I am opposed to 2 tax regimes. It makes the tax regime clumsy. But I suspect that this government is moving towards a no exemption tax regime. But the simpler way to do that is to say, sorry, I don't believe in exemptions at all. Whether you have a social security nest built for yourself or not, I don't care. I'm going to abolish all exemptions. You announce that and bring a sunset clause where all exemptions will cease, say in 2026, 27. Put a date. Why do you have these 2 clumsy tax regimes and then you introduce, I think, a grossly unfair provision that the default option is the new tax regime? How can the government say the default option for me is the new tax regime?
Okay.
If you're not able to motivate me to move to the new tax regime.
Dr. Lahiri, you're one of the top tax experts of this country. Respond to this critique that why do this thing about 2 tax regimes. If you believe and you're signaling that there should be no exemptions, move headlong in that direction.
See, removing exemptions, experts have been talking about it for a long time, at least 3 decades. But there are political hurdles because the middle class is so powerful in India. They want exemptions, they want house rent allowance, provident fund, standard deductions, all of them they want. And I don't think politicians find it easy to muster the courage to do this. So when they give an option, you give them a sense of voluntary switching.
And you
switched on
incentivize it
yourself.
gradually. But Mr. Chidambaram, I asked you for advice for our viewers. Instead, you put on your hat as a politician, and your advice would arguably get the government and the finance minister into trouble if she actually did away with exemptions, which would arguably be the cleaner, simpler tax regime and potentially the direction in which we should be heading. But if you do it now, there will be a backlash. There are elections in 9 states coming. There's a general election next year. So your advice actually would land the finance minister and the government in trouble.
No. Please understand, Rahul, you're making a mistake. You're making a mistake. From the government's point of view, it is an exemption. From the taxpayer's point of view, it is the only way to build a social security nest for himself. You see, if I grow old and I retire, I must have an income. I must have a flat or an apartment. I must have a little house in a village. I must have money for my health requirements. I must have money to send my child to a higher education institution. Is the government doing all that? The government is not taking responsibility for the social security of the vast majority of Indians. And if you deny them exemptions, how will they build a social security nest? So it's all where you sit. If you're sitting in the tax collector's chair, it will look like an exemption. If you're sitting in the taxpayer's chair, it is my building my nest for myself, a social security nest for myself.
Okay, you've punched back hard. I leave it over there. I don't want to weigh in one way or the other. We've heard from Piyush Goyal, we've heard from Aswini, Vaishnav, from Parameshwar Iyer, we heard from Corporate India, we heard from the former finance minister. We leave it to you to decide where you sit. Ultimately, as Mr. Chidambaram says, what you see depends really, Dr. Lahiri, on where you sit at that moment. So thank you so much for joining us all through the day. You were here early in the morning. You come from really far away, so we appreciate the effort you made. Thank you. And thank you to all our viewers for tuning in a long day. We're not done. Far from. Rajdeep comes up next. He's got Jayant Sinha, Shashi Tharoor, K. Subramaniam, Suman Berry, Dr. Amit Mitra joining him. So there's a power-packed panel coming up at 9 p.m. with News Today. So thank you very much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed our coverage all through the day. Rajdeep comes up next, and then we've got a lot more at 10 as well. So please stay with us in our live and continuing coverage in India Today and Business Today. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you. Thank you very much.
सो रहा था?
सो ही तो रहा था। सोते हुए जगाना पाप होता है लिया।
ये पाप तेरे मैट्रेस को लगेगा। हर मेमोरी फोम ऑर्थोपेडिक नहीं होता है। असली नींद के लिए switch to Duroflex. With doctor recommended Duroflex mattresses that have 5-zone full body support. Nothing like Duroflex. सो रहा था?
सो ही तो रहा था। सोते हुए जगाना पाप होता है लिया।
ये पाप तेरे मैट्रेस को लगेगा। हर मेमोरी फोम ऑर्थोपेडिक नहीं होता है। असली नींद के लिए switch to Duroflex. With doctor recommended Duroflex mattresses that have 5-zone full body support. Nothing like Duroflex.
PM Awas Yojana. The outlay for PM Awas Yojana is being enhanced by 66% to over 79,000 crores. A capital outlay, I'm talking about railways now, sir, Honorable Speaker, railways. A capital outlay of 2.40 lakh crores has been provided for the railways. This is the highest ever outlay this highest ever outlay is about 9 times the outlay made in 2013-14.
यकीन मानिए पहला सप्तर्षि में पहला इंक्लूसिव डेवलपमेंट। कोई एक धारा दिखा दीजिए कि इंक्लूसिव मॉडल हो। बेरोजगारों की संख्या कितनी है? कई करोड़ में है, और आपके पास क्या मॉडल है रोजगार के लिए? तो आपने गोल गोल बातें की हैं, कोई भी ठोस ब्लूप्रिंट नहीं है। तो फिर ये आम बजट कैसे हुआ साहब? ये तो खास लोगों का, खास लोगों द्वारा खास तरह से बनाया गया बजट है।
This was the culmination of the Bharat Jodo Yatra in Srinagar on Monday. The journey of reinvention has seen many images, many faces of Rahul Gandhi. When he set out on the 4,000-kilometer yatra, a clean-shaven Rahul was the man on a mission. To unite the country was the stated agenda, but to tide over upcoming elections was the bigger goal. That goal required political muscle, so all Congress leaders put their weight behind the Gandhi heir. If the aim of the yatra was to showcase Rahul as a man fit to take on Modi in 2024, it was also to showcase his human side, the people connect, the one loved by kids and youth alike. A family man, a doting son and a brother. An animal lover, a man who could walk with Aam Aadmi and the Khas Aadmi alike. A man of faith, a Shiv Bhakt, a secular face. As the yatra continued, the beard started to grow. The look changed, but the white t-shirt remained, even in the biting Delhi cold. But then a jacket was added, later a cap, and finally a firan. Whether these viral images translate into viral votes is something India will be waiting for and watching. Bureau Report, India Today.
She is one of India's most recognizable international faces. She has acted in films in languages that range from Hindi to Tamil to Telugu to Kannada to Malayalam to Bengali to even Hungarian, French and Italian. But did you know that none of these are Aishwarya Rai's native language? If you did not already know, it's the beautiful ancient language Tulu from coastal Karnataka. But why are we telling you about Aishwarya's mother tongue? Well, because the Bombay government in Karnataka has just set the ball rolling to give Tulu status as the state's second official language after Kannada.
The government has finally formed a committee under the supervision of Mohan Alva to submit a report within 1 week to the state. With elections around the corner, the long pending demand of the people of coastal Karnataka is finally being fulfilled, the part of Karnataka which exported talent across the country and the globe.
Native Tulu speakers number about 1.8 million and are concentrated in the coastal districts of Karnataka.
Maatirla smile maltondu ತಾಟಿ ಬಿಡೊಂದು ಮಾತೆರ್ಲ ಮುಲ್ಪ ಸಮ್ಮಾನ್ ಮಲ್ಪನಾಗ patiently ಕುಲ್ದಾರ ಮಾತ್ರ.
But famous Tulu speakers are many. From Sunil Shetty to Shilpa Shetty to Pooja Hegde, to KL Rahul, to Prakash Raj, Anushka Shetty, Kadri Gopal Nath, to Sandeep Chota. Tulu is a rich and vibrant language with a distinct culture, literature and traditions. The Tulu-speaking community has been demanding official recognition of their language for a long time, and they see this as a way to preserve their cultural heritage and promote their language. The demand for Tulu as an official language has been driven by a number of factors, including the growing number of Tulu-speaking people and their increased representation in the state's political and cultural landscape. Apart from the well-timed move right before elections, the recognition of Tulu as an official language could boost the local economy of an important part of Karnataka by creating job opportunities in language-related fields. Bureau Report, India Today.
Presented by Sunfeast Dark Fantasy Choco Fills. Din Khatam Fantasy Shuru. Co-presented by LIC Har Pal Aapke Saath. Co-powered by OLXautos.in. Only OLX Autos gives OLX extra price for every car. Co-powered by Redmi Note 12 series. Driven by the all-electric Mahindra XUV 400. Pharmeasy, one of India's leading e-pharmacy.
Hello and welcome to our special continuing coverage of what we are calling Sabka Budget, or what some are calling the mini Thali budget. A little bit for everyone. How should the budget be seen? What's the road ahead? That's going to be our special focus. But first, it's time for the headlines. Major tax relief for salaried and middle class in the budget. Rebate till 7 lakh yearly income under the new tax regime. Tax slabs also see major